This is the 90mm f2.0 lens from Fuji, and in this video, this episode, I'm going to share with you why I think this is such a great lens for travel, street, everyday, and even sports. And that's one you didn't see coming, right? So this is not going to be a full-on superbly technical review. This is more going to be based on my own experiences, also kind of an open discussion. So before we go there, if you're new to the channel, I'm Paul. I take photos. You can see what I do on my website for kind of photography, www.paultakesphotos.com. And if you want to keep up to date on what I'm actually doing here on YouTube, consider going to my community tab where there's polls and quizzes almost weekly. And occasionally I share my photography there. So anyways, that was about me. Now let's get back to the subject here, which is the 90mm f2.0 from Fuji. Now this lens is about 650 grams, or about, I think it's about 2.5 pounds. For the American viewers, it has a filter thread of 62mm. It's fully weather sealed. It isn't image stabilized, and it retails roughly between $850 and $1,000 depending on where you are. So the price is quite substantial, I would say. Fuji lenses tend to be normally a bit cheaper, but it's worth it. Now the first thing here, this is the first reason why I think you should have it, is the focal length. It's 90mm on APS-C, which on full frame translates to 135mm. And you're thinking, street photography, isn't that supposed to be, 27mm, 35, 40, 50? Yeah, according to what I see here on YouTube, it should be, but I believe for street photography, travel, and also sports, this is ideal. That 135mm focal length combined with an aperture of 2.0 on APS-C, which is 3.0 on full frame, it's a very different thing. Yeah, you can get really, because it is that narrow, you can get really intimate shots. You can really focus on certain subjects or whatever you want to do. It really makes a very different experience in terms of photography. It really, for me, once I bought this lens, I bought it used for a couple of $100. It really opened up my eyes. A friend of mine was using it, he recommended it, and I have to say he was right. This really opens up a whole plethora of new ways of experiencing your photography, but also on how you do your photography. And that's the second reason. Because of this narrow aperture and a minimum focusing distance of 50mm, you're gonna have to rethink every shot you ever took. If you're shooting on, let's say, very wide, up until 50mm, 60mm focal lengths, yeah, you have that narrow compression already. But when you go to up to, let's say, 75, or in this case 90mm, that's where things change. And I have a few examples here. If you shoot on 27mm, you'll see it's very wide. Here's a 90mm. What do you think of that? It's very narrow. That also forces, at least it forced me, to really rethink the compositions I was shooting, because suddenly things became very up close, because this in essence is a zoom lens. And I started also looking at the composition. And for instance, I have an example here. This was shot in Krakow during the winter. You see this lady with a child strapped to her chest and then a big winter coat over it. The great thing about this lens is that because it is so narrow, you can shoot from relatively bigger distances. I think between 6 and 12 meters. And, afterwards you can pretty much crop in, so you can recreate a composition. That's the first thing that I really noticed. And it really took me a few afternoons to get used to this lens, because it is so narrow. And it's also got an aperture of f2.0, which is like, bokeh craziness, right? But there's more to this lens. It's not just the way you shoot with it, but it's also, it takes a bit of time. I would say it's an acquired taste. What do you think? I personally love it. Once you get used to it, I love it. And that also brings me to the third topic here, which is the image quality. And this is, I think, by far, technically speaking, if you really look at the images, the best Fujifilm lens you can buy. It's center sharp at f2.0, no vignetting whatsoever, no chromatic abbreviation, no barrel distortion. Yeah, no pin cushions or almost none, even up to f16. It still remains fantastic all the way around. So I think that's one of the things in the image quality as well here is pretty stellar. In general, whether you shoot like this shot relatively up close, 2 meters, or this shot here where you see me now zooming into the actual food trucks. There was a bunch of ladies sitting having a great time, you know, a blue hour in the evening. I took that shot afterwards, I punched in, and I was actually amazed on how much detail and shadows the actual image rendered. I'm like, wow, this is a fantastic lens. It really is. Now, you'll probably be thinking, Paul, this is a hallelujah version you're giving us, knowing you, and if you follow the channel, you do. And if you want to know more about me, consider subscribing. There must be some catch-22s on this lens. Well, actually there isn't, but there is one thing that you need to consider. Once you have this lens, and if you follow this channel, you know I combine it on my X-T30 Mark II. The center weight, because of the weight of the lens, it's more than 600 grams, right? So I think it's about 2 pounds, I would say, or even more. If you walk the entire afternoon with an X-T30 or an XC4 or you know, any of the other Fuji cameras, you'll feel that it becomes pretty heavy. And I think if you have an X-T1 up until 5, yeah, the form factor of those cameras is a little bit better. Yeah, so for it, suited. That's what I think. It's not a showstopper, but it's definitely something. If you're going to be walking around here purely handheld the entire afternoon, you're going to be feeling it. So that's one of the first things. The second thing here is, yes, we have here a great aperture ring. It's nice and clicky, as you can hear. We have a great focus ring. That's fantastic as well. But I'd really love to see that this lens was a bit more image stabilized. Overall, I'd say when you go into sports, much to my surprise, I was like, oh, look at this now. This is actually pretty cool as well. By big surprise, okay, it's tennis, but I still enjoy the pictures. So this is a joy to actually shoot with, and it's also a joy to see your images coming out. So let me know what you think in the comments. That's it for this week.